Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Bit of a skeptic about Kanye West's new birthday party.
Yeah, it's not the Republican or the Democrat. It's the birthday party. Happy birthday!
His independent bid for president of the United States, so he announced. We'll see what he does to act in furtherance of such a candidacy. It is worth noting that the filing deadlines to be an independent candidate in states like Indiana, Texas, Maine, New Mexico, North Carolina have passed.
Right. And then he did have an album coming out, so people thought that he said this, prior to dropping his album for publicity.
According to Forbes, the rapper slash sneaker mogul is ineligible for as many as 187 of the 538 electoral votes up for grabs. So it doesn't look like a particularly compelling independent path to the presidency. I'm sure he doesn't believe that there is one. There must be a point to this. Maybe the point would be, per this interview he gave to Forbes magazine.
It was long and lengthy and a little crazy at times.
Maybe the point would be, and wouldn't this be a service to the nation?
What?
To expose the mythology behind Planned Parenthood and Margaret Sanger. Planned Parenthoods have been placed inside cities by white supremacists to do the devil's work, said Kanye West. Oh boy. Those champagne socialists on the lakefront and in the leafy suburbs aren't going to like that, but you're not allowed to criticize Kanye West lest you open yourself up to be criticized as a racist, right? Difficult, complicated times for the lobotomized left. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Daniel Flynn, senior editor of the American Spectator, author of Intellectual Morons and A Conservative History of the American Left. Daniel, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, what a service to the nation, as I said before. What a moment that could be if Kanye West is the one who makes a wide swath of America wake up to the disgraceful, despicable, ghoulish, ghastly history of Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, it was amazing to me that in this moment in history where you have people tearing down statues and defacing all sorts of memorials, that Margaret Sanger, who has a bust in the National Gallery of the Smithsonian, and in my hometown of Boston, there's a statue of her with her mouth being muzzled. That is, I'm sorry, it has a statue of her with a blindfold on her eyes, I believe, or one or the other. Anyhow, there's no movement to remove any of these public honors of someone like Margaret Sanger. And to the contrary, when Kanye West spoke up about her misdeeds and her, the words that she chose, he was jumped on by not only the entertainment press and the music press, but the mainstream press as someone who, said something dishonest and had no grounds in the fact. But, when I went through her papers at the Library of Congress about 20 years ago, I've had some shocks looking at some things. I don't know that I've ever had a shock looking at in the archives of any institution as I had when I looked through Margaret Sanger's papers all those years ago.
Oh, but you mean like the sterilizations that she promoted and other eugenic, other procedures consistent with a commitment to eugenics?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one of all, the biggest shock was, she had something called the Plan for World Peace, which she delivered as a speech in 1932, and then she later released as an article. She thought so highly of it, she released it as an article. And in that plan, she talked about a choice that they would give between 15 and 20 million Americans. It's about a sixth of the population at the time. The choice would be between sterilization or segregation on a farm for the period of their entire lives. In other words, a life sentence in a concentration camp, or to be sterilized by the state. And, this massive plan for concentration camps in the United States, this is a year before Hitler came to power in Nazi Germany. And so she wasn't just sort of, taking in the zeitgeist that was going on over Europe. She was really influencing it. And, I had always heard about her saying things, calling human beings human weeds, and that her newspaper used as a masthead, a slogan on the masthead for a time, to create a race of thoroughbreds. So I always knew she was into eugenics, but the idea that she wanted to place, almost 20% of the country in concentration camps. I mean, I don't know anyone who's proposed something so evil in the history of the United States and yet has maintained respectability. If they're giving out awards to people like Hillary Clinton or Martin Luther King in her name, she's just, I guess, an untouchable. You cannot bring this up about her, and that's what Kanye West is finding.
And she spoke at KKK rallies. She used the N-word before, but her personal life, I mean, talk about how she abandoned one of her children and she hated Catholics.
Yeah, around 1912, 1913, she got into some trouble because she had a 1914 or so. She had a publication called The Woman Rebel, and the way that her biographers record it is that Anthony Comstock, who was kind of like a public censor, a morals crusader, chased her into exile because she was giving out birth control instruction. Now, those publications, which were destroyed in the archives at NYU, were later found, and they don't have anything in there about birth control instruction. So that's just not true. I mean, she had birth control advocates in there. There's nothing in there about birth control instruction. What she did do was advocate the assassination of John D. Rockefeller Jr., which is interesting because this guy became her biggest benefactor about a decade later.
Of course.
Now, she went into exile, and she left her kids in America. Now, this exile was basically a publicity stunt because she really wasn't she wasn't really facing all that much trouble. And she left her daughter behind, and this went on for about a year. Shortly after her return, she left all her kids behind, but shortly after her return, her daughter died. Her son Noah later blamed the death of her daughter on her mother's departure. And that didn't stop her. When her other kids, she sent them off to boarding school at a very young age. There's a rather poignant story in my book, Intellectual Morons, where, she sets up a meeting with her son where she's going to come Easter weekend to go visit her son. And he's writing her all these plaintive letters, come, please come, say you'll come. And so she says she'll come. And he sits there waiting for hours and hours at the train stop, and she never shows up. She never sends a telegram or anything. She just was someone who did not want to have the responsibilities of motherhood. And obviously, as a wife, as I noted in the piece, she cheated on the guys that she cheated on her husbands with. So she wasn't very good at that either.
Just going back to some of the things she outlined in her Parliament of Population plan, that's in your piece in the Spectator. The first step would be to control the intake and output of morons, mental defectives, epileptics. Oh boy. Well, that would certainly raise some issues with so many people who are involved in nonprofits that aim to serve people with disabilities, including developmental disabilities. Margaret Sanger had a plan for them. How does that square? And boy, how does that square with sort of the right to die or the death with dignity movement of today, the euthanasia advocacy coming from the same population control ghouls? You also, it just goes on. The second step, taking an inventory of the second group, such as illiterates, paupers, unemployables, criminals, prostitutes, dope fiends. Classify them in special departments under government medical protection. Segregate them on farms and open spaces. And so on and so forth. And as you say, she also had nasty things to say about Jewish people and Italian families who are, quote unquote, filling insane asylums, unquote. To me, this is a failure of conservatism. This is a failure of people who love this country, that we do not have a complete understanding of Margaret Sanger, that she is still has a bust in the Smithsonian, is still her name still dons awards that politicians were supposed to take seriously, accept them with a great honor and plaudits.
We should take her statue down in Boston.
Isn't it a complete failure on our part, a failure on our abdication of K through 12, our abdication of academia? how does someone like this, one of the worst people in American history, continue on as somebody who's revered by at least a lot of Americans to the extent they even know who she is?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it. The other part of it, I'm just surprised that there's been such a stubborn, real recalcitrant people who are admirers in the media, in Planned Parenthood. I think it's a little, for Planned Parenthood, this is tough because she founded the organization. It's hard to de-link her from the actual organization. And so what they do is just deny, deny, deny. But, it's interesting. She was someone who wrote and advocated against the whole idea of charity, particularly for mothers, because she said these are the exact people we should be discouraging from having kids. So why have these maternity centers? And so she discouraged any kind of thing that was going to help mothers. And yet here you have a group called Planned Parenthood saying that, she's a great lady. She wasn't. She was a real sort of bitter social Darwinist, and that fact gets lost in the discussion.
Well, and also the whole notion that we not only countenance her, and we allow them to continue to bob and weave around her, as you say, deny, deny, deny. I would just love to hear a contextual, historical explanation for Margaret Sanger from the left, like the ones they reject when it comes to our founding fathers and the like. That would be interesting, but that requires somebody to actually put it between the eyes of people on the left, and we just don't have very many people who can do that, do we?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing in this moment in history, when you have, statues of saints being torn down, you have Christopher Columbus being torn down, George Washington. You even have, in my neck of the woods, Plymouth Plantation, which, they recreate 1624 in Plymouth Colony and Plymouth Plantation. There were no slaves in Plymouth Plantation in 1624. And yet they're changing the name of that. So the sensitivities are so great that a place that recreates a moment in time where there are no slaves, they have to change the name because plantation for some people means slavery. Now, in that context, I don't see how a person like Margaret Sanger is able to last. There has to be a canceling of her. If there's a canceling of Plymouth Plantation, one would think. But that hasn't happened yet. And I think that's one of the reasons why Kanye West's words about her in that Forbes interview so fascinated me, because, here's a guy who obviously has enormous influence, at least in the segment of black community that's really into rap music. I mean, he's probably the most famous rapper on the planet.
Definitely.
And you listen to the crickets from some of these people.
Yeah.
They were either criticizing him, calling him a liar, or they just decided to ignore him. And I realized, as you guys said prior to the segment, that this is a guy that's he's a little crazy. We all know that. But there's this character in Shakespeare, the wise fool, that you see a lot, Jacques, and As You Like It is kind of an example of that, where you have a really foolish guy who once in a while, during the play, will say the most insightful things. And I think that's what you have in a guy like Kanye West. He's sort of a perfect example of that wise fool.
Yeah, and he also, that Sunday services, and people would stand in line 48 hours before just to be able to get in. So I think he's found God again, and he's pro-life, and he says that during his Sunday services. So it's almost like he has almost a cult following too.
He is Daniel Flynn, senior editor of the American Spectator, author of Intellectual Morons and A Conservative History of the American Left. Daniel Flynn, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Daniel. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Hi, I'm